Good evening, everyone. I may just ask, firstly, I hope everyone is well this Wednesday evening. Just to make sure everyone is able to see myself and Connor on the screen, as well as the Building Stronger Club's webinar slide. You could just type yes in the chat function, just to make sure everyone is able to see us. And if there's any issue, please let us know. We'll just give 30 seconds for that, if that's all right. All right, just seeing on the chat function, some of you are able to see myself and the slides. It does depend if you are accessing this on your phone or on a computer. That may impact you being able to see me or the slide only. So in that case, it's not the worst thing in the world that you cannot see me, but as long as you can see the slide, that is definitely the most important part of it. Bear with me for just a moment. All right, we will get started. Firstly, welcome everyone to the second webinar of the BICWA project. This is in a series of 4. Those of you that were unable to be a part of the last one, I would strongly recommend please watching the previous webinar. It will give a little more context into what we will be covering today. There is a lot that we will be covering today as well. So by all means, please feel free to ask some questions in the chat function as we do go along. We will not always get time to answer everyone's, but just to let everyone know, we will be fully contactable via email, via phone call after the webinar in the days to come. So if there is anything within this workshop that you want further explained, please feel free to follow up via email. One of the other things that I would also like to mention is that there will be some resources to follow after the webinar today. You will be getting quite a comprehensive volunteers and members resource, so that will cover a lot of the strategies. But what you will also get is some one-off resources on some of the specifics that we cover throughout this webinar. So by all means, interact as much as you can and you want to. And there will be a few interactive activities along the way as well that my colleague Connor will explain. However, if you would like anything answered after this webinar today, please feel free to contact us via email. All right. Okay, so before we get started, just wanted to touch on who we are as an organization. So Inclusion Solutions, for those of you that were at the last webinar, apologies, I will be just recapping who we are as an organization. But Inclusion Solutions effectively has been working in the space for the last 30 odd years. We were previously part of an organization called Inclusion WA. And Inclusion WA still exists today, but really primarily works around the disability sector. What Inclusion Solutions does is we work with any organization from grassroots all the way up to federal government. And we work a lot with local governments, non-for-profits, community organizations, clubs and groups, and state governments as well. And more recently with national sporting organizations and state sporting associations as well. And what we essentially want to do is ensure that any organization that we work with is inclusive of not just people with disability, but all people. Now, in the last webinar, we did go through a lot of the specifics around what inclusion is and what inclusion isn't. So again, I'd strongly urge you to watch that one if you are able to. And today we're really focusing on club land, on clubs, on groups. Those of you that will be tuning in from local governments, community and club development portfolios, this is a great way to support those clubs and groups, as well as those clubs and groups that are tuning in today, some really practical tips on how you can, I guess, strengthen what you already have, but also look for further opportunities and look to grow as well. So that's a little bit about us, a little bit about myself. My name's Adam. I've been with the organization just over 3 years now. I'm a senior inclusion consultant. I have worked with a huge array of different stakeholders in the work that I do. I previously come from a recreation management background and really have a passion for community development and working with people to ensure that they're welcoming of all people. I guess just a little bit about me. I have a wife and 2 young kids that keep me very busy, 2 beautiful daughters, and I love anything to do with a ball. Any sport that has a ball, I'm for it. Anything in the ocean, I'm there most weekends. And I have a bit of a passion for doing up old lawn mowers, something that I like to do in my spare time as well. So just thought I'd share a little bit about myself so you know who's going to be talking at you for the next 15 minutes. I'll hand over to Connor now to just give a little bit around who he is.
Hi, so my name is Connor. I am a 3rd-year law student at UWA, and through the McCusker Institute, I've been set up as project officer at Inclusion Solutions, doing an internship for the past few months. In terms of more personal stuff about me, I enjoy working out and I enjoy writing, and I actually attend the UWA Social Sport Netball. So if anyone from UWA Sport is listening right now, I hope to see all of our recommendations implemented within the next 6 months. Otherwise, the only thing I want to mention is some chat moderation stuff. I'll be running chat moderation. Make sure if you are sending any messages regarding the content or a question in chat, just make sure you're sending it to all panelists and attendees, not just all panelists, so that everyone can be involved in the conversation. And also, as Adam mentioned, later on, we'll be doing some sort of interactive stuff. That'll involve me sending a link to a survey or a poll in the chat, and you can just follow that and answer it, and we'll see your answers in real time. When that is sent through, if chat starts messaging and you lose the link, don't worry about it. Just message that you've lost it, and I'll send it through again. Other than that, just before we start, I would quickly like to, on behalf of myself and Inclusion Solutions, acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we are meeting on, or at least Inclusion Solutions is meeting on currently, the Whadjuk people of the Perth region. We wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution that they make to the life of this city, the region, and the land upon which the city is built. I think that about covers it, everything I have to say. So Adam, I'll throw back to you.
Thank you, Connor. I would also just like everyone, depending on where you are in WA, we're very fortunate to be speaking to people across the state. So just take a moment just to acknowledge the land in which you're on today as well, and where you're dialing in. So there is quite a lot of content that we are needing to get through today. So if it does seem like I am rushing or going through something quite quickly, please forgive me. However, we will be following up with information to, I guess, further articulate some of the topics that we are covering today. But again, just want to reiterate, please make sure that if you do want to get more information or something to be explained after the webinar, please reach out. So today what we'll be covering is we'll start off with some foundations, just talking about clubs and groups and I guess some of the things that really looking internally and what our clubs and groups are currently doing. Also, again, staying internally, looking at the opportunities that are provided and how we can strengthen from within. We will then be looking at communication, both internal and external, and we will be ending off by unlocking some of the assets around us. Now, I will just let everyone know at this point that although we will be touching on very briefly asset-based community development, the next webinar on the 28th will be going in more depth around the topic. So we will just be scratching the surface to a degree, but by all means, please feel free to ask questions along the way. Now, thank you for those that already have engaged with the chat function. I hope everyone has been able to, if not see myself and the slides that are up on the screen, at the very least viewing the slides. What I would like everyone to do is just take this opportunity to just get comfortable in your chair. Make sure you've got a glass of water or a cup of tea or a beer or whatever it is that you're doing on an evening, because what we won't have an opportunity to do after this point is take a break. So I will ask everyone just for the next minute, there's 2 questions up on your screen. And the first one is, what makes your club or group strong? And if you aren't part of a club or group and you're dialing in from a local government, try and think of some of the clubs or groups that you have been involved with. And equally, what areas does your club or group need to improve? Now, the reason we're asking those 2 questions in particular is I want to try and contextualize as much as possible to some of the answers that are there. So I'll give everyone a minute, quickly grab a glass of water if you don't have one, get comfortable and answer those 2 questions in the next minute. Thank you. All right, brilliant. Seeing quite a few coming in now. Nothing that has overly surprised us at this time. And I think one of the things that's really interesting, while people are still answering those before I go on to the next slide, is COVID has obviously impacted everyone around the world, and WA is no different, although we have been a lot less impacted than some of the other states and countries. But one of the things that really it has heightened is that some of the strengths that clubs or groups have had pre-COVID, people have really been able to galvanize around what those strengths are. But equally, some of those areas of improvement have been highlighted even more. And just some statistics to share with you is a lot of clubs and groups, the statistic was 25% of clubs and groups lost 25% of volunteers and members through that time. But what was some more anecdotal feedback from some of the surveys that were done, both through state government department and some of the work that we've been doing as well, is that volunteers, although yes, there were many that stepped back and really reprioritized on how they were spending their time, it really gave the opportunity for some of those people that had not necessarily volunteered before in a club and or didn't really know how to put their hand up. COVID did allow an opportunity to say, hey, I think I can do a little bit more in this club. So there's some interesting anecdotal feedback that we've been getting over the past few months. And hopefully we can continue seeing that trend and get volunteering in particular, but as well as community clubs and group membership back up and running. Alrighty, so I'm seeing a lot around volunteers. There's a lot around retaining volunteers, finding those opportunities to keep people engaged. We've also got quite a lot around engaging new members. So I will try my best to hit on a lot of those. And I guess you're in the right webinar, because we will be touching on many of those. So the first thing I'd like to touch on today is setting the foundation. Now, a lot of clubs and groups will have values and mission and vision statements, and most organizations will have these things. Now, the reality is a lot of organizations will go through the process of developing those and then keep them in the bottom drawer at someone's desk. The reason we bring this up is if you are a new committee, if you are a committee that's gone through some change, but equally if you are a committee that might need to just reflect and review why you are actually doing what you are doing at a club and group. It is extremely important to visit those values, to review those values, and to look at the beliefs. And the reason I do mention that is your values and beliefs are going to impact the behaviors within your club. Clear values, clear beliefs to members and volunteers is extremely important, especially when somebody is new and joining a club. The behaviors are going to be set through that process. And what that will ultimately affect is the expectations. Now, as a club or group, if you are focused on performance, if you are focused on community, if you are focused on inclusion, whatever your core focus is, it is really important that your members, the rest of the committee, of course, but your members and your volunteer base are exposed to that. A big thing around expectations, I think, is really important. I think both for volunteers and for members. Now, we'll be touching on a few strategies on how some of those expectations can be mitigated and how they can be articulated. But it's really important that any new member to a club, any new committee member, any new volunteer, really from the beginning, those expectations are outlined early. I think it saves a lot of angst down the road, and we'll be covering that in a little bit more detail as we go forward. Now, the first thing that we are going to be looking at internally, so those of you that have leadership roles within those clubs and groups, as well as committee roles, I think sometimes we can get so caught up in the operations of a club, in the core activity, that we don't always realize what the roles at a club are. And if we do, we're not always across how they're filled. And the reason I mention that is the beginning of each season, the end of each season, whenever there is an opportunity to really identify the roles that exist in a club. Starting with the committee, after you look at what roles are in a committee, look at what the participation roles are for what members are really going to be experiencing. Start looking at those volunteer roles. Now, we'll touch on in a little bit how we can break down some of those volunteer roles, but really thinking about, again, either at the beginning or at the end of a season, midway through is great, but realistically it's difficult, but really thinking about every single volunteer role and identifying those within the club. Identify the must-haves and then identifying the nice-to-haves. Because if we don't start sharing those as a committee, it's very difficult to start recruiting for those roles unless everyone has identified what those roles are. Now, again, a lot of you might be doing this really well, but some of you might not be focusing on volunteering as much as you could do. And we've really, again, highlighted this during COVID, where volunteerism is down. So one of the things we really want to start looking at is not just the traditional volunteering roles that exist, but also think about those ad hoc tasks that often fall on the first person at the field or the last person at the clubhouse, and really putting those all down on paper. Lastly, thinking about some of those social opportunities, things like social membership, thinking of opportunities that you might have within the club and group and events that really provide that social atmosphere, and identifying the roles that you might need for that as well. Thinking about how roles can be flexible. Firstly, if roles can be flexible, and if you are able to make those roles flexible, think about how they can be modified. Extremely, extremely important when it comes to volunteering roles. We know now, if somebody if a club president or at the AGM says, who wants to be secretary? The likelihood of people putting up their hand in a hurry is low. Now, what we mean by modifying roles is think how you can take some of these traditional roles and break them up, and think about what the core activity of the role is, but equally, how can a role be modified for somebody that's time poor? How can the role be modified for somebody who has kids? How can the role be modified for somebody who's FIFO? And really think about how can these roles that you've identified be as flexible as possible and modified. And the last thing is developing volunteers. And what we mean by that is, especially the state sporting associations, those of you that are part of community groups and have other peak bodies, is there is a huge push to start developing volunteers. And that's for a couple of reasons. That's one, to upskill, but also to provide those professional development opportunities for those volunteers so they can, one, be more effective at the roles that they have. Two, it plays a major part in retention. And what I mean by that is, when I was part of a committee at a soccer club, I was always quite keen to do refereeing courses, to do other coaching courses, to do other things that I know I could bring back to the club. If as a committee, we are not letting our volunteers know about these opportunities, more often than not, they're going to seek it themselves, and that might be at another club. So promoting and developing those opportunities for volunteers moving forward. Alrighty, now we are going to go into our first interactive activity. And we've started identifying the roles that we have within clubs. And what we know about a lot of clubs and community groups is that a lot of the time they don't know what their members do. We don't know what their members are passionate about and what they're knowledgeable about. And your members in particular are your biggest asset. There was a cricket club, quite a large cricket club, I won't mention it, had about a 250 person membership base. Now these were it was a junior and senior club, and this includes some of the parents. And the president of that club put up their hand and at one of our workshops and said, we just can't find volunteers. We've tried everything and we just can't find volunteers. And the first question a colleague of mine asked is, do you know what your members do? Do you know what they do for a living? The answer was no. Do you know what they do in their spare time? The answer was no. This club, although they had 250 members, they couldn't fill 5 volunteering positions that they needed to be filled out of a membership base of 250. And one of the biggest assets we know is the membership base at clubs. And what this activity is going to do is a great tool to be able to engage members and look at how we can approach them when it comes to volunteering opportunities. That same club, after utilizing this tool, had so many volunteers that they had to either A, turn them away, or B, start finding ad hoc roles to be able to support all the people that wanted to be involved in volunteering. And that's a best case scenario. So we are going to play an activity called Head, Heart, Hands. I will explain it, and then Connor will send through the link in the chat function, if that's all right, Connor. So what we're going to do is we're going to send through a link that has 3 headings. The first heading will be head, the next heart, and the next hands. And what I'm going to ask everyone to do when they open this link, and please don't do it just yet, just so that you can hear me explain it. Under the head section, what I would like you to do is write 3 things that you think you are knowledgeable about. You don't have to be an expert, but 3 things that you think you are knowledgeable about. Under heart, I would like you to write 3 things that you are passionate about. Absolutely can be big. I'm passionate about Liverpool FC, but I'm more passionate about gender equality. So 3 things that you are passionate about. Under hands, I would like everyone to write 3 things or type 3 things that you are good at. You don't have to be the best, but 3 things that you think you are good at. Doesn't have to be with your hands, but 3 things that you think you are good at. Now we're going to give everyone a little bit of time to do this. We'll give everyone 5 minutes. We will be able to see the answers. Just to recap, head, 3 things you are knowledgeable about or you think you are knowledgeable about. Heart, 3 things you are passionate about. And hands, 3 things you are good at. Please click on the link if you haven't already and fill those out as you can. We will wait until we have the majority of the panelists fill those out. And while you're doing that, often people will find it quite difficult to talk about things that they're good at, passionate about, knowledgeable about. There's a bit of tall poppy syndrome where we think, oh, I might know a little bit about that, but do I really? But I want you to trust yourself. Think of the things your friends would say. Think of the things your family would say about you, the good things, while you're filling this out. Connor, I might just ask if you can send the link again. We've just got one person that's unable to open it. Hannah, I see that you're having a few issues with the sound and the slides. May I suggest maybe logging out and logging back in? We've tested the sound on our end, all seems to be okay. For anyone else that might be struggling to open it, opening a browser and then copying the link in might be a little bit better for you. It just does depend on what search engine you're using. I think most people have got it now. All right, fantastic. Seeing quite a few answers coming through already. Now, although I'm going to breeze over this and use an example in a moment, please note you will get a resource on how to use this within your club after the session today. All right, just want to mention that. Now, what we're seeing, and I'll use that club that I used an example earlier about having a huge membership base, however, not being able to fill volunteering roles, is that that particular club had never taken the time to find out about who their membership are. A simple exercise like this really allows individuals and allows clubs to know who their membership bases are. And there's a couple reasons for this. A lot of the time, if we have taken the time to find out a little bit of information about somebody, and I'm going to pick a couple here at random. The first one I had, somebody has put finance, technology, and sport as something that they are knowledgeable about. As an example for that one, if that individual was approached and let's say there was a treasury position available, instead of saying, hey, we need a treasurer, which again can be quite a daunting task, if we're able to take roles and really break them up and modify them and approach an individual because we've taken the time to find out a little bit about them, to say to that individual, do you have 1 hour every fortnight to have a look at the books to ensure that everything is in order? Now, yes, that might not be a full treasury role, but it might be an aspect of a treasury role that can be quite easily filled by somebody within that membership base. You've taken the time to find out about that individual. They automatically feel valued because of that reason, but also something we'll cover in a little bit. You've been specific, you put those expectations on the time commitment, and you've been able to approach that person individually and say, can you volunteer 1 hour of your time every fortnight? Now, we know that when a person is specifically asked, they are 41% more likely to say yes than if a bulk email is sent through. Now, this essentially is touching on what the next webinar's topic is, asset-based community development. So I'm not going to go too much into it, but taking the time to identify the skills and talents of your members is so, so important. Both so that you know who you have in your membership base, but also then those members will feel valued. Creating a spreadsheet, again, head, heart, hands can be a great tool to be able to utilize that. But finding out even more information, what a person does for work, what a person does in their spare time. The beauty about head, heart, and hands in particular is often we can draw some of those more specific data out from people. Once we've been able to identify, as I mentioned, allocate and ask people based on the information that they're sharing. If they have knowledge around finance, what's another few interesting ones? We have somebody here who's put ABCD, has knowledge around asset-based community development, has knowledge around local government. Brilliant. If that person is in your club, utilize them to create that relationship with the local government, with the club development officer, community development officer. Think about people that someone's put policies here. What a great opportunity to ask that person to review policies, to keep them in the loop and to engage them as a volunteer. Again, once you have identified the skills and the passions and the knowledge within your membership base, don't be afraid to allocate and ask. Ask, ask, ask. I cannot emphasize this enough. As I mentioned, 41% of people are more likely to say yes when they are directly asked, and especially if you've taken the time to find out a bit of information about them. Lastly, as I mentioned, develop and support your assets. If you know people have a particular interest in something, look at opportunities on ways that you can further develop those interests, those assets within your membership base. Alrighty, more information will be on the resource. I highly recommend using this tool next social event, next AGM. You can use it with sticky notes. There's a whole bunch of strategies in being able to implement it. Simply, you could just put it on a form when a person or a new member signs up. All right, I'm conscious of time, so moving swiftly ahead. The next one is around effective communication. Now, for a lot of clubs, this might be quite basic information, but again, it is really quite important to think about how we are communicating internally. Now, what I might ask is that everyone, just for the first question, is just in the chat function, please feel free to put down any communication methods that you currently use internally. So this is to members, this is to committee, this is to the people that are internal to the organization. Just in the chat function, write down a few ways that you are communicating internally. Great, Rosalind, I see you've put quite a few options there, which is brilliant. It's really great to also see that people are still picking up the phone. I think that is extremely important. In person, fantastic. Now, the reason we asked that question, and I wanted you to share, is take a look at the chat. If there's something that you're not utilizing and somebody else has shared, use that. A variety of methods is so important. Having one point of failure often can exclude some people. There was a club that was only using WhatsApp to communicate, and that was fine for the people that were using it, but there was some other members that really didn't want to use it because of some of the security and privacy settings and barriers that WhatsApp used. So again, having a variety of methods. Yes, it might be a little bit more, it might take up more time, but it's really important when we're trying to look at an inclusive way of communicating. Variety of methods, really, really important. So again, touching on the variety of those of the mediums that we're using, but then also ensuring that the language that we are using is inclusive. And what I mean by that is often through text in particular, we might be using sarcasm, we might be using a joke at times. And what we have seen and what we have heard is that sometimes those things can be taken out of context. So really being clear on the language that we're using, always trying to be as inclusive as possible. Again, there will be a terminology resource that people will be able to utilize, but really thinking about how we're portraying and putting our communication effectively with kindness and ensure that we are inclusive. making sure the right person is doing the communicating. Now, I know that again does sound quite simple, but if it is the grumpy old man in the corner that has been put up his hand to be part of the communication team, really think about how is the messaging getting across, and is that really the right person? If we're having an open day, if we're at game days, if we've got social events, what I really suggest is having somebody who is a strong, friendly, bubbly communicator communicating with members, because often the communication and the style of communication that we're receiving is really going to set up the environment that we're in. The last one is, again, the art of asking, a really great resource that we will send through as well. But that's really thinking about how are we delegating? How are we asking people to do tasks? And how are we ensuring that we are not only asking people that have put up their hand to volunteer, but also those people that haven't? And how can we include them in some of the volunteering and membership opportunities? Alrighty, what I am going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Connor just to talk about some of the communications externally.
Thank you, Adam. So essentially for this next section where we begin to talk about how you're communicating with people external to your club, potential recruits or businesses you might want to have sponsor you, the way we want to start it is with a poll where you guys are going to follow another link that I send into the chat.
Sorry.
And answer how, yeah, sorry. And answer how you would do that. There'll be, and then at the end, we can then compare and contrast what kind of methods everyone is using. And then Adam is gonna go over the best ways to use each of these methods and see if there's anyone using a unique method that everyone can learn from, essentially.
Dennis, you asked quite a good question around should all contact details of all members be available to all members? Of course, there's huge safety concerns in that. I will cover a little bit around contact details in a moment. So, but yeah, good point. I think it's really important privacy is really important. So it is going to be situational, but I wouldn't recommend that all contacts are available to all members for that one, but we will touch on that in a little bit. Right. Great. So we've obviously put a few of the very common ones right off the bat, but what we're really interested in is the other section. The reason being is we are going to share what everyone is using. It's completely anonymous. But again, if there's a way that you think, oh, I haven't thought about using that avenue, and another club is using it, I would say explore. Effective communication externally, like internally, variety is key. And while the rest of you are finishing those off, some of the really obvious ones were the ones that you saw in front of you, but some of the other ones to really think about is looking at local radio stations. A lot of the time, a lot of local radio stations in particular are looking for content, are looking for people to let them know what's going on in the community, reaching out to them. Now, yes, it might not work the first or second time, but consistency is really key. And that's the same with local papers. Local papers, as we know, are crying out for good news stories. Clubs that have a good public profile effectively probably aren't doing much more different than you are, but what they are doing is they found a contact at their local paper, or that information can be found online, finding a contact for the local paper, emailing them a picture with 1 or 2 sentences. Really simple stuff, something on game day, some event that's just happened. Papers are crying out for good news stories, and utilize them. Likewise, utilizing the local government channels, speaking to your club development officer or community development officer and saying, hey, this is some of the stuff we're doing. There's some really good things happening here. How can we get some further promotion? Local government's role is to promote some of those community organizations and connect people to good community organizations within their local government area. So use the local government as your asset. Some simple things, flyers, of course, are important. They can be quite cost heavy, but things like tearaway flyers at shopping centers, looking at some of those local cafes and restaurants that are really highly populated, especially if you're looking at a targeted demographic. For instance, there was a club that was focusing on having more seniors and masters teams at their club. And what they did is they went to the local coffee shops that are full during the day of people older than 65, 70, and that was their target market. And by having flyers at that cafe, they recruited almost an entire team. So thinking about, if you are targeting a specific demographic, where are you going to engage them? Notice boards, local newsletters, of course, are important. A lot of local governments have newsletters as well. And again, ensuring that if the wider community is not aware of what you're doing and how you're doing it, it is really difficult to create that public profile. Make sure your website is up to date as well. Think of your website as a bit of a shop front, but then the Facebook and those other channels really more once you're inside the shop. So paid Facebook advertising can work. It does have mixed results depending on how effective you're using it. For instance, I would not be putting links to your web page in Facebook paid advertising. That will diminish the algorithms and won't allow that post to be seen as much as it could be. But really thinking about the different ways that you can effectively communicate externally. Alrighty. Now, again, we will share just those results because there are a few interesting ones that you won't be able to see, but some interesting ones that people have put down in terms of other ways of communicating. In particular, we've got things like online questionnaires, I think are really good. We've got quite a few people that have put newspaper and radio. Presentations of key info, I think that's really good at any opportunity throughout the season or the club's running. So we will share a lot of those after the webinar. So just to recap on effective communication, thinking about how you communicate to the community and what you're doing to attract new members. Is it one of those lucky clubs where I guess members and volunteers are in abundance and they're filtering through quite easily? If they're not, think about a strategy, have a chat to a committee. Often you can have committees where you've only got really 1 or 2 decision makers. Diversity is really important when we're looking at decision making. So really include your entire committee as much as they want to participate. Include your entire committee if you are looking at strategies to attract new volunteers and members. Welcome packs. Sports clubs, any club really, but sports clubs, this is a major, major, major one. The reason being is there's a lot going on. There's different teams, there's different managers, there's different levels, there's different training days, there's different match days. Welcome packs is something that was really well utilized probably about 10 years ago, and it's something that's a little less utilized now. Welcome packs are extremely, extremely important for a few reasons. One, things like code of conduct, policies, key information of key personnel, as well as expectations can all be put in writing, and it's a great thing to reference if there's any grievance or any issues that come along, but it also gives people the knowledge with that information. One of the biggest things, especially if you've got someone that might be a bit anxious in joining a club or they're new to the sport or the group, having a welcome pack really makes people feel like they are equipped with information to be able to participate in the club. Key contact details. Dennis, I think it was, that asked a question earlier. Really important to have the key people's contact details. What I mean by key people, if you're a club and you've got presidents or secretaries or registrars or people that are really going to be community facing, I would strongly suggest have contact details for those people. Whether that's an email address, whether that's a phone number, it's for somebody, and I'll use myself as an example. When I first came to Australia, I wanted to join a soccer club. That's something I felt like I could do. But I needed to ensure that I could pick up the phone, find out where the field is, speak to somebody that knows about the team, speak to somebody where I know that I can say, hey, I'm coming down on this day, who should I look out for? Key contact details are really, really important. The clubs that do it really well, whether it's on their website or welcome pack or Facebook, not only do they have the key contact details, but they have a picture so that I know if I'm going down to the club, I can look out for Adam, or I can look out for Connor, or I can look out for that specific person, and I know what they look like. So key contact details, name, picture, all really advisable. Utilizing social media, I think we've touched on that a little bit. Some clubs do get a little bit social media happy, and what I mean by that is they'll decide to go on 3 or 4 different types of social media, but won't really do any one of them really well. Facebook definitely does have the most reach, Instagram as well, but I would rather, instead of doing 2 half-heartedly, I would always suggest do 1 and do it really, really well. Look at the algorithms. Those admins of those groups, the admin of those clubs, utilize those algorithms, see what they're doing, see what the reach is, who the demographic is that are clicking on posts, because what that can also do is help you identify who's making the decisions on coming down to the club. But also, if you are ever looking at paid advertising through Facebook, you know who to target a little bit more. Canva. Those of you who do not know about Canva, shame on you. It is a fantastic, fantastic tool, and it is completely free. You can get a paid subscription, and what it essentially is, for those of you that don't know, Canva is like Word, Microsoft Word, but for images and flyers. It makes everything really easy. I myself am not a creative type, and at times I'm not great with technology, and I can use it extremely easily. It is a great tool. We will send through a resource and a bit of a how-to to get that up and running. Now, the beauty of Canva, not only is it free, it's developed by a person from Western Australia. You can get a paid subscription to have more options. To be honest, it's very rarely needed, but Canva is a great way to develop any marketing material, including Facebook posts. Definitely check that out, and you will get a resource around that. Your biggest asset, as I mentioned previously, are your members. Use your members. Word of mouth is so important. Have conversations. Those of you that have leadership roles in clubs, make sure you are taking the time to develop relationships with your members, because they are going to be your biggest champions. All right. I'm conscious of time, so there's the next slide I'm going to touch on is, again, just recapping some of those other things on also when we're looking at creating positive partnerships. And what that really means is, think of the partnerships that you have. It might be the local government, it might be the local rec center, it might be other clubs and groups. But think of the partners that have common goals to you and share a lot of those values that you have. As an example, if you're a footy club and you are sharing facilities with a cricket club, or you have a cricket club down the road, create those partnerships to ensure that whichever off-season is happening, that those members have another opportunity to play or be involved in a club once the off-season happens. But think about the people around you. Think about who has common goals. Those reciprocal relationships are really important. If you're a senior club, not all sports have senior and junior components to their club, but making sure you have close relationships to your lowest hanging fruit and your assets. Also think about the long-term goal. And what we mean by that is, especially with sponsorship, it's very easy to quickly go for a bit of a cash grab, especially when we're looking at sponsors that might seem attractive and have a bit of money. But really, those sponsors that you want to be looking out for are the ones that are sharing that vision that you have as well, but also that are committed to being in a bit of a long-term relationship through sponsorship. And it might be a little less from year to year, but instead of doing a sponsorship agreement that's 1 year or one-off, think about doing ones that can go for 2, 3, or 4 years that might be lower cost, but again, those organizations can align themselves with you. So just a few tips on creating positive partnerships, which is going to lead me to the next slide. We are going to play a game, and this is utilizing a tool that Apple and Google and a lot of big corporations use. And what it's essentially used for, and again, there will be a resource around this, so you can implement this in your club. But what the power of 10 is really used for is it's about unlocking that creative aspect on any topic that you're wanting to cover. As an example, if we were in a workshop, I would say to everyone, shout out the first 10 things that come to mind when you think of blue. And often things will be ocean, sea, they'll look at something visual, inclusion solutions, logo, and they'll rattle off probably 1 to 5, 1 to 7, quite easily that relate to blue. But then what we see happening is from about 6 to 10 is really when a lot of that creative thinking starts to unlock. And what I mean by that is people will then start looking a little less away from the obvious and the visual, and they'll start saying things like sapphire, like sadness, like eyes, and all these other things that aren't super obvious. As an example, this is how the Apple Watch came to be. But the way that this can be really well used for clubs and groups is you can use the power of 10 on absolutely any topic. As an example, a club was putting together social events, and they were really struggling to understand, why is no one coming to our social events? So what they did as a committee is they wrote down and they said, what are the social events that we've been offering over the last 2 years, and why haven't they been going well? And what they very quickly realized is they were flogging a dead horse. They were trying the same social activities and really weren't giving the opportunity to think outside of the box. They were recycling the same 4 or 5 ideas. They did a power of 10, and out of that came Bogan Bingo. Now, Bogan Bingo, for those of you that don't know, essentially is bingo, the game, with a bit of a novelty on dressing up and I guess sharing a bit of banter. After they had run that 3 or 4 times, their membership skyrocketed. And that is through using a tool like the power of 10 to think of things outside of the box. So what Connor is going to do is send the last link through of the evening. And I'm going to ask everyone to think about 10 assets, 10 organizations, 10 people, 10 anything that can help promote, or who you can partner with to help promote your club. I'll give you a few to start off with. Local government, local paper that we've discussed already, local rec center, local shopping center notice board. Think about 10 ways, assets, people, organizations that you can help promote your club. We'll give a couple minutes for everyone to complete that. Now, those that will be thinking, it is going to be difficult for one person. And the reason we do this and with a webinar is to also highlight how important it is to collaborate with the rest of your committee. Now, you might be thinking of things and writing them down as you go, but if you have 2 or 3 other people that are also able to put input and bounce ideas off, this exercise becomes a lot easier. Still give it a crack. I'll give another couple minutes. If we get 1 or 2 answers, that's great. If we don't, that's also okay, because I do realize that it is quite tricky. One to 5 is normally easy. But try and get creative. There's no wrong answers. All right, I am going to move on. What I would like everyone to do after this, if you've got 2 minutes to try and complete that power of 10 assets, organizations, people, anything that can help promote your club, please fill it out and send it through. But it is really around the example of how to use the power of 10. Again, we will get a resource around it that will be included in the packs that everyone gets after the webinar. A great tool for absolutely anything. We mentioned events, we mentioned promotion, but this can be specific. It can be around how are we recruiting volunteers? What are some of those avenues? How are we looking for sponsors? Any specific topic that you have, you can use the power of 10 and start seeing how you can think outside of the box. I highly recommend doing this as a committee because, again, diversity is really important, not only in decision making, but for ideas as well. Alrighty, I will be moving on. Oh wow, we've got 5 quickly. Some didn't quite get to 10, but some did. So really well done. We will share these again so you can see what other community clubs, groups, and organizations are doing. Well done to those that have got all 10. If the clubs that have got to all 10 and have done it quite easily, if that happens, take another piece of paper and try and get to 15. If that's easy, try and get to 20. The whole point of it is to give yourself as many options as possible and to try and think outside of the box. So well done to those that have filled in. We've got 11 so far, so well done to those. Alrighty, just a few more slides to get through. I'm going to rattle through this one because the next one is a little more important. But think about future proofing. What does your community look like now? And what are some of the trends that you are seeing within your community? Club development officers are great for this. Talk to them, ask them about what the community looks like if you're unsure. Ask them about what are some of the trends that are happening within the local government and what some of the demographics are. A really good tool, and I would suggest people to write this down, I might ask Connor to put it in the chat, is something called ID profile or profile ID. If you type any of those in, it will come, and that really gives you a breakdown of who is in your community. Now you can look at this as a local government, you can also look at it as a suburb, but it really gives you a good idea of who is in your community and what the demographics are. So really thinking about your community. The next is planning. Now, yes, no one loves to do a SWOT analysis, but what I do suggest all committees to try and find a little bit of time to try and plan. I know at the end of a season, often people can be knackered. I've been there, I've done that part of a committee, and the last thing you want to do is start thinking about the season ahead. But a little bit of foresight and a little bit of planning can often go a really long way. So try and make time for that and put that in the expectations of a committee. Lastly, delegating and sharing responsibilities. If you have 2 or 3 people doing all the work, they are going to burn out and you're going to lose them. The amount of clubs that got hit so hard because of COVID, because people realized I don't need to spend 20 hours a week on this club and neglect a whole bunch of other sides of my life. Delegation is key. Sustainable, good operating clubs share the load. It is really important for presidents, vice presidents, anyone in those leadership roles to look at ways that you can share and diversify who is making decisions and where those responsibilities lie. Often, the people that are complaining about doing all the work also struggle to let go of the reins. If you are one of those people, try and think about how you can delegate. People want to put up their hand, they want to help, but it also equally, those people that are holding the power need to be able to relinquish it as well. So think about what that looks like for your club. Sustainable clubs share the load. Okay, lastly, we might go about 2 minutes over. I understand if you do need to leave, we've got 3 more slides. The next one I just want to talk about is events. Social events are so important. Think about having a social committee. Think about having a committee that looks at other things besides of what the core activity of what your club or group holds. Social events are not only a great way to promote and advertise your club, but also to get people that would never think about joining your club for whatever activity to get a bit of information about that. I know my grandmother, and those of you that were part of the last webinar, I shared a very personal story about how my grandmother joined a club, a bowls club, that she had absolutely no interest in bowls at all. But because of a social event, an ongoing social event at the club, nothing to do with bowls, she had an opportunity to be able to join that club. And that, as I mentioned, had a huge impact on her and my life. So really think about the social events and how you are opening your doors to more people that would not necessarily be at your club. Come and try events are really are great. Involve your members. If you're a committee and you make decisions and quite secular and don't involve your members, try and think of ways that you can involve those members. Try and think of ways by learning things like through head, heart, hands. You might have somebody who has a passion for music that can put together playlists for an event. Utilizing ways you can draw in your members to start having input into some of what those events are. Look at a welcomer. Again, think about who is that person greeting new members? Who is that person greeting somebody at an event? The first few seconds when a person has come to your club is often going to dictate how they feel in that environment. Allocate a welcomer, somebody that knows about the club, knows where to get uniform, has information, but most importantly, has a positive, bubbly personality, because that is going to be a huge impact on new members. Key information, as we mentioned, make sure that you have a variety of channels that you're promoting any events, especially come and try events. Incentives are great. Any incentive really, it could be free uniforms, it could be discounted on fees, it could be a friend half price. Think about incentives and make sure they're marketed, that people know that there's an incentive. Finish with something social at the end of a season, at the end of an event. Really important, really galvanizes a group and leaves a good taste in people's mouths. So something social is really important. And capture people's information. Follow up. What we mean by that is through head, heart, hands, find that information, capture it. There's no point in getting a whole bunch of information and not keeping it. Once you have that information, get a spreadsheet, whatever, get that information down and follow up. Big thing that clubs tend to do, and I've seen it time and time again, is they get people interested, people are excited, but they never follow up. If you say you're going to follow up or you say you're going to speak to somebody, do it. If you can't, apologize and do it at a later date, but follow up. Really important. So just some things that you can do within your club. Review your mission, vision, and values. It's going to impact your expectations, the expectations of members and volunteers. Don't let it rot in that second drawer in the filing cabinet. Create a list of opportunities within your club and group and make sure that you are actively promoting those to your members. Once you know what is needed to make the club or group run, think about how you can identify the assets in your membership. Do a head, heart, hands, do a power of 10, use these strategies to start getting some of those different ways of thinking. We do not have time for the case study, so I will share it in an email when Zoya follows up. If anyone does have any last minute questions, however, please feel free to put them in the chat. Alternatively, follow up, when you do get the follow-up email, feel free to reply. Ask around any case studies or how things have worked. If you've got a specific issue, especially if it's a little bit prickly, let us help you. If you've got an issue within your club and you'd like some advice, please put down and we will either give you some great outcomes on that issue, or we will point you in the direction of other clubs and groups that have overcome similar barriers. Equally, if there's any great successes, we always want to hear about it. We want to promote the clubs and groups, especially in BICWA, clubs and groups that are already doing good things. One thing I do want to just mention to everyone, a really great quote from a colleague of ours, Rob Gearson, and something he said is, if you are going to open your doors, it makes sense to open them a bit wider. What we mean by that is think about ways that you can engage new demographics. Think about ways that you can make sure your club is more inclusive, because your doors are already open. Let's just make them a little bit wider. On behalf of Connor and myself, I'd like to thank you. I know we rattled through a lot of information quite quickly. From our point of view, it's less about us talking at you, but also that you have the tools after the webinar that is recorded, and you will get a recording, is that you have those tools, those tangible tools, those practical tools that you can go into your next committee meeting, next time you have the opportunity to meet with the club, and really start looking at ways that you can implement them to build stronger, more connected clubs. On behalf of Connor and I, thank you very much. I hope you have a great evening, and looking forward to the next webinar on the 28th, which is specific to asset-based community development that Zoya will be hosting. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone.